Hello. So, I didn't even get a description in there. I didn't realize I didn't pre-schedule this. So, I hope people get the notification. I'm going to I always give it about 5 minutes for the notifications to get out. Yes, it's a little chilly in here. We'll chat for a couple minutes. This has been the longest chapter we've had yet. So, hang on. This stuff, if you've never heard of it, it's biotin. You get dry mouth due to meds and things. That stuff works. It's not just a moisturizer, it has an enzyme so that it really works in there. It works great. I love it. I've been using it for a few years. So it kind of helps when I'm talking quite a bit. So I'll give it 5 minutes. Whether anybody's in here or not, I'll start. Because I know a lot of people do watch it on the replay. So this is a hard one. Yeesh, moly. So we have 16 pages, I think I figured out to get through. So I'm going to be reading fast and trying not to stop too much. I think we stopped enough for the first two parts. That's why it took so long, because it was just the stuff this man talks about is just, I just don't understand. I don't understand this huge part of this book is about every woman on earth has either tried to unalive a pregnancy or had an affair while pregnant. That is his basis for engrams, or what we call trauma. He calls them engrams. And so he says you have engrams all the way back to pre-birth in the womb. And he goes into detail about, hi Irish, he goes into detail of how what's said around you while you're in the womb will ruin you for life. That's pretty much what the basis of most of the stuff in this book. It's just ridiculous. How you doing, Irish? Oh, thank you for I think you said some kind words. I was driving to Austin Friday, and I had the day before Natalie's show ready on, and I had that day's show ready to go on after that. And I'm driving, and I hear, oh, and Miss Kim in Austin. And I'm like, because it's up and behind my steering wheel when I'm driving, because I have the maps up too. I'm like, because it's hard to hear. There's a lot of wind. So that was cool. And you and a couple other people said some really nice things. Thank you. So that's cool. I've had a lot of people stopping lately. A lot of people. There were these two young men Friday night. Like I said, you never know how long you're going to have somebody stand there and listen to you. Oh, thank you, Irish. I appreciate that. One of them was sitting on the bike. They let me put the camera on him, so you'll see him. And then they looked up the chat. They go, so are you filming? I said, we're live. You're on. So they brought up the channel and were looking at themselves on the live stream. But they stayed, weren't in a hurry. And we talked, I think 20 minutes. I got to go back and look, see how long that was. And I said, yeah. And I kind of exhausted everything I could think to say at the moment. And I was like, yeah, 2 years ago, I didn't know anything about Scientology. And they said 5 minutes ago, neither did we. I'm like, that's how it goes, And so watching the streamers with those two girls, all the streamers that showed up for that, and they were feeling so frustrated that they weren't able to really do enough, they felt. And I keep trying to tell people and remind myself too that this is going to take time. A movement like this against an entity this large is going to take time. So I just hope, it's been a year now at least since the really big movement of the protesting and filming and stuff like that. There were people that have done a lot of stuff before that, but it was just this last year that people like me felt that we could get involved. And so I think that's why so many people have gotten involved, is because, we're able to try to do something and help. It's just, I hope people aren't getting too discouraged, because, if you look at any big changes in the world, in history, it didn't happen overnight. You have to get the word out. You have to get the masses to hear what's going on. Then it has to get to the government, and then somebody in the government has to decide to do something, or something is going to have to blow up. I don't know if it's going to be the LAPD, these lawsuits, the grand jury investigation, but we're seeing, it's small, but we're seeing change, in that Danny Masterson was brought to trial and convicted. These other lawsuits are going forward, and social media, I know social media is going to be the death of Scientology, because they've lived in secrecy for almost 70 years. And so social media is going to be the thing, I think, that gets them, because it's the only way for us to get this word out. Because before, you had to rely on journalists and newspapers and the news to get word out, and grassroots movements didn't get a lot of attention. So now we're doing it ourselves. So I just wanted to put that out there. All right. So let's get started, because this is, I think I said it was 15 or 16 pages. So I'm going to be reading quickly, and I'm going to try not to stop too much. We talked a lot through the first two parts of this chapter, and what I was saying at the beginning was really life force units. This is something that he just kind of made up, but an emotion, and mainly he's dwelling on the fact that if you're caught up in your trauma, he calls them engrams, that it can reduce your life force. And I mean, in the real world, that can be true, in that if you have a lot of trauma, if you have a lot of mental imbalance, or you're depressed, your quality of life is going to be low. So, I mean, I can always see what we would call normal human behavior, normal human emotion, and the brain, and where he has taken it and just completely changed the words and made it this whole science thing, when it's just really basic human life, human emotions. He just makes it sound like he's got the key to it, and we know that he doesn't. But a lot of people that read this didn't know that. So, all right, so we had finished, and I marked this paragraph, and I'm going to reread it, because we ended just after that. So this is what he said: to get as early as possible, as fast as possible, and find basic. If I remember right, basic is like the very first memory you've had. So you're at the end of or you found the very first memory, and there's nothing before that, if I remember this correctly. In the direction and intent of therapy in its first stages. To accomplish this, when it cannot be done immediately merely by returning and finding basic, which can and always should be tried, one relieves the case and robs the engram bank by releasing life units. Painful emotion captured them from the ally computations. Why did I mark that? To get as early as possible, as fast as possible, to get to the earliest memory. One relieves the case and robs the engram bank by releasing life units or painful emotion. So it's pretty much, I'm going to try to, what's the word I want? Put that in real language. So yeah, if you go to therapy where you get some sort of therapy for your trauma, and you can release some of that trauma, which is painful emotion, then he's saying you have more life force units. So yeah, you're going to feel better. That's pretty much what all he just said, I think. All right, so let's get moving. Okay. In brief, the entire intent in active therapy is to find the earliest engram and erase it, and then proceed to erase all other engrams as engrams so they can no longer be discovered. They refile in the standard bank, but it takes a genius to find them there, and a search of hours and hours. Hence, to the auditor, they can be said to have erased, for they are no longer engrams and are now experience. Now, see, in real life, we would call them experience or trauma. The first, last, and only job of the auditor is to find the earliest engrams available and erase them. That cannot be said too often or too strongly. Also, if you haven't been with us the first two parts of this chapter, they don't believe you if you tell them you don't have memories from the womb, that you don't have any engrams or trauma from being in the womb. They're not going to believe you because of this. Their training says it's there. You have to find it. So I've heard several ex-members talk about how they had to make stuff up in auditing to get it to end. And I can understand how, because they've talked about 500 and 1,000 hours of auditing to get this stuff done. And could you imagine being locked in that room doing this for hours and hours and hours? I would make something up too. All right. The various ways to accomplish this are the techniques and arts of therapy. Anything which brings about this erasure of engrams in place and their refiling as experience is useful and legitimate, whatever it includes. An engineer intends to remove a mountain which is in the way of a river. His intent and all his effort is directed toward moving that mountain. The ways and means employed by him to move that mountain by steam shovel, hydraulic rams, or dynamite are the art and techniques applied to do the job. There are 3 degrees of knowledge in our task. 1, in danetcs, we know the goal, we know the results, which come about when that goal is attained. That goes back to, they know they have to find engrams in the womb, so they're going to keep on until you give them something. So we know the goal. 2, we know the character of the obstructions between us and the goal, but of the exact character of the obstruction, we can never learn too much. 3, the art and technique of removing the obstructions between us and the goal are legitimate only by the test of whether or not they remove the obstruction. The method of attack on the problem can always be improved by learning more about the character of the factors in the problem, and by learning new arts and techniques which can be applied to the problem, and by studying to improve our skills in practicing existing arts and techniques. That was period. That was comma. My eyes are a little blurry. The currently existing art and technique is not to be considered optimum merely because say that again. The currently existing art and technique is not to be considered optimum merely because it does the job. The time and ease of work could be shortened by new techniques or advancing skills for old techniques. All this is interjected so that danetcs, unlike Aristotelian logic and natural history, will be recognized as an advancing, changing science. It is interjected at this place because no auditor should just sit back with this routine and never try to improve the routine. I just realized I'm missing one of my pillows. Well, I'll be all right. Okay. Very well. This is the routine. It works, but it can never be made to work too quickly or too well. 1. Place the patient in reverie, which we know is hypnotism. Place the patient in reverie and scout into the prenatal area to see if engrams are available for lifting without further work. If they are there and can be found, take the charge out of them and erase them if possible. Do not try to erase anything as remote from basic as birth unless the file clerk insists on presenting birth. In other words, get the subject into the prenatal area and look for the earliest engrams. Do not ask for specific instances, particularly for something like birth. Just take whatever is presented. If you can't get back early, take step 2, which is scout the patient's life while he is in reverie. Do this in any event sooner or later if the case slows down, but only if slows down to a point where early engrams are either not reducing or are without any emotion. Establish in this scout whoever may have sorry guys. My eyes are blurry today. Establish in this scout whoever may have been depended upon by the patient and be suspicious always that he has not told you the really important allies, but do not tell him you are suspicious. 3. Find out when the patient lost any ally through death or departure. Approach this moment in one way or another by getting earlier material and this incident or getting just this incident. Discharge the sorrow of loss out of the incidents. Treat any incident in which the ally departs or the patient is separated from the ally as an engram and erase it accordingly, or run it until it has no charge of sorrow on it. If the charge holds, suspect an early moment of sorrow about this ally and find that and treat it as an engram. 4. First, last, and always, the job is to get basic, and then ever afterwards, the currently existing earlier moment of pain or sorrow, and to erase every incident as it is advanced by the file clerk or found by repeater technique. 5. Any incident that hangs fire always has a similar incident earlier, and the patient should be taken earlier for the prior incident when an engram will not reduce on recounting. 6. At any time the engrams start to become emotionless in tone, even though they reduce, suspect another ally computation and early or late in the patient's life. Get it and reduce it at least until the emotional discharge is gone. Do not get everything in a case restimulated by changing from an unreduced incident to something which looks more fruitful, but reduce everything in view before you go looking for a new sorrow charge. Okay, that kind of makes sense if this was real. 7. It is better to reduce an emotionless early engram than it is to upset the case by hounding him for an ally computation when a cunning search fails to reveal one in sight. Erasing early emotionless engrams will eventually bring a new ally computation into sight. Hold on. Stubborn. She's being stubborn today. Wouldn't listen to me. Okay. 8. Consider that any holdup on a case, any unwillingness to cooperate, stems from ally computation. If you don't remember that, an ally is somebody either while you were in the womb or in childhood that was on your side. And so you look to that person, even if it wasn't fully, it could just be somebody that said, oh, don't bother him or something. Just something as small as that. They consider an ally, somebody you would feel comfortable and would be kind of like a savior to you. I think, if I remember that right. 9. Treat all demon circuits as things held in place by life force units absorbed into the bank, and address the problem of demon circuits by releasing charges of sorrow. 10. Consider that loss by death or departure of an ally is identical with a death of some sort of the patient, and that the reduction of a death or departure of an ally will restore that much life back to the patient. And remember that great sorrow charges are not always death or departure, but merely maybe a sudden reversal of stand by the ally. And if you, like I said, if you look, hi AA, I haven't checked my email today. I need to do that. I'm glad you're here. I'm kind of afraid to check my email. So just to let you know, remember we talked last week about me having an interview with AA. Well, we scheduled it and I didn't get up in time. So we're still going to have to do that. I'm sorry about that. Y'all know how my brain is Swiss cheese. If I'd have just told my husband the night before I needed to be up, even though he didn't work that morning, he would have made sure I was up. So, but if you're here, that means maybe you forgave me. Who else? Hey, Greg. Okay, well, I appreciate you stopping by. Hi, Scooter Mom. Oh, that's okay. I also didn't pre-schedule this. I was about to go on and I realized it wasn't even in here. I had to hurry up and put it in. So, okay, great. Thank you, AA. I appreciate that. So, 'cause I was really looking forward to doing that. All right, where were we? So we were talking about the allies. Oh, so what I was going to say was, so I'm reading what he writes, but I'm also keeping in mind of what we know. Thank you, AA. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So I try to also parallel that with regular therapy and things that go on in therapy. I've been to a therapist a few times. Yeah, I was supposed to. And again, my Swiss cheese brain totally forgot. Oh, hi, Susie. Hello. I'm reading fast today because we have like 16 pages. I want to get this chapter over. This is the third part of one chapter. It's taken us 3 Sundays. So anyway, what I was saying was, so I'm thinking, because I had an ally. I'm my own personal experience. So I've mentioned before that I had a lot of trauma as a kid from my mom. It was mostly verbal and mental. But my grandmother, my dad's mom, my dad wasn't in my life much. He moved away. But my grandmother was in my life all the time. The only reason I am not a complete basket case as an adult is because of her. So I would consider her my ally. She was always there for me. I spent many weekends at her house. She's the one that took me to church and taught me about family. And so I would consider that an ally. Now, it's a lot bigger than what he says. He says that even just somebody saying one nice sentence while you're in the womb and you hear it, like your dad or a relative, that's your ally computation. So even in regular life, he's taking regular things in therapy or in normal human behavior and just turning it, making it sound scientific in this new theory. And it's not. This is not new. All right. Always keep in mind that that person who most nearly identifies himself with the person of the patient, such as a sympathetic mother or father or grandparent or relative or friend, is considered by the reactive mind to be part of the person himself, and that anything happening to this sympathetic character can be considered to have happened to the patient. In such a case where an ally has been found to have died of cancer, you may occasionally find the patient to have a sore or scaly place where he supposed the ally's cancer to have been. Now there is where he departs from normal behavior. Glad you could stop by, Greg. I like your name. So there's where he goes beyond science, beyond therapy to, okay, because somebody you cared about or relied upon had cancer, you're going to have some sort of bodily reaction. Now, I do know that that can happen. I have heard where you can have, that's why they have the word psychosomatic illness. You can get psychosomatic illnesses, just not, L. Ron Hubbard thinks it happens to every single person. Everything that's wrong with you is a psychosomatic illness. There's where he takes it to the nth degree as far as regular human behavior. So, all right. The reactive mind thinks in identities only. The sympathetic pro-survival engram identifies the patient with another individual. The death or loss by departure or denial of the other individual is therefore a reactive mind conviction, and the patient has suffered some potion of death. Hey, before you came on, I thought of this. So you had auditing done. I've heard from other survivors that because they want to get back to these prenatal engrams that most people really don't have. Did you so they would make stuff up to get out of auditing. Did you ever have to do that? I'm just curious. We can talk about that more when we do your interview. But I wanted to ask somebody about that because I've heard them talk about it. Okay, where were we? Suffered. No. Okay. See, that's interesting. Being a never in, we're not sure how that always works. Okay. We can talk more on it if you want to when we schedule. Emotional charges may be contained in any engram. The emotion communicates in the same tone level from the personnel around the unconscious person into Well, if you feel like talking about it during our interview, maybe we can talk about that because I am kind of curious. All right. I'll start out. Guys, my eyes are so blurry today. I don't know why. It's weird. It's like something's going, and it's both eyes. Well, auditing sounds complicated. After reading this, it sounds complicated. I can understand your answer. Okay. That's unconscious. Okay. Anger goes into an engram as anger, apathy as apathy, shame as shame. Whatever people have felt emotionally around an unconscious person should be found in the engram which resulted from the incident. When the emotional tone of personnel in an engram is obviously angry or apathetic from the word content, and yet the patient recounting does not feel it, there is something somewhere which has a valence wall between the patient and the emotional tone, and that valence wall is nearly always broken down by the discovery of an engram with a sorrow charge sometime earlier or later in the patient's life. And I will say sorrow charge is a new term. That's kind of an interesting term. The only legitimate reason for entering later portions of a person's life before the prenatal area has been well exhausted is the search for sorrow discharges occasioned by the death, loss, or denial by an ally. And by denial, we mean that the ally turned into an active enemy, real or imaginary, of the patient. The counterpart of the ally, the The counterpart of the ally, the pseudo ally, is a person whom the reactive mind has confused with the real ally. The death, loss, or denial by a pseudo ally can contain a sorrow charge. According to theory, the only thing which can lock up life units is this emotion of loss. If some method existed of doing nothing but freeing all life units, the physical pain could be neglected. A release is brought about one way or another by freeing as many life units as possible from periods of loss with minimal address to actual engrams. The loss of an ally or pseudo-ally need contain no other physical pain or unconsciousness than the loss itself occasions. This is serious enough. It makes an engram. And again, I'm just seeing the parallels of regular therapy, and the loss of an ally in your life can cause, your subconscious mind and cause you sorrow, and you need to release it. I mean, this is what you would do in regular therapy is you would find, the things that cause you trauma, cause you depression or anxiety, and you try to find that moment or person and you try to work it out until you can get over it. So he really is just using, I like I've said before, if he was really, doing this and without all the other stuff, he could probably has helped people to a point to release at least, things that have happened in their life. Any person who is suddenly discovered to be occluded in a patient's life can, with some reliability, be considered an ally or pseudo-ally. If either while remembering or returning large sections of a patient's association with another person are missing, that person can be called an occluded person. It is a better guarantee of ally status if the occlusion surrounds the death of the person or a departure from or a denial from that person. It is possible for occlusion to take place. Also, for punishment reasons, which is to say, the occluded person may also be an arch enemy. In such a case, however, any memory present will concern the death or defeat or illness of the occluded person. Occlusion of a person's funeral in the memory of a patient would theoretically label that person an ally or pseudo-ally. Recollection of the funeral of a person, but occlusion of pleasant association might tend to mean that the person was an enemy. That's interesting because personally, I don't have childhood memories of my mom up until middle school when we moved. So one of my therapists said, well, you can't remember it because it was traumatic. And, there are people that go through regression hypnosis to get these memories back. I don't want to. I know they're there. I know enough because I remember the rest up until I moved out. So again, he's really what he just said there kind of, makes sense that you've occluded these memories from you don't have the, they're deep in your subconscious. Like they're still there somewhere. So that's kind of interesting. I just wanted to remark on it. Wasn't it? Such rules are tentative, but it is certain that any occlusion means that a person had a vast and unrevealed significance in a patient's life which should be explained. It may be remarked at this point that the recovery of the patient will depend in large measure on the life units freed from his reactive bank. This is a discharge of sorrow and may be quite violent. The usual practice is to forget such things, and the sooner forgotten, the sooner healed. Unfortunately, this does not work. It would be a happy thing if it did. Anything forgotten is a festering sore when it has despair connected to it. The auditor will find that every time he locates that arch denier, forget it, he will get the engram it suppressed. When he can't locate the engram and yet has found a somatic forget it, or don't think about it, or can't remember it, or don't remember it, or some other denier will be sitting there in the context of the engram, which is kind of what I just said about me. Although maybe there's some truth to that. Like, I think if I were in therapy and they wanted me to remember and I said I didn't want to, they would say, well, the better to deal with it than not deal with it. Maybe that's true. Pseudo is pseudo, yeah. Oh, am I saying that wrong? Pseudo? Pseudo? Okay, got it. Okay. I read a lot of words, but I don't use them in my vocabulary. Okay. It may be remarked at this point that I think I read that already. I did. Where was I? Okay. He's talking about it again. Forgetting is such unhealthy business that when a thing has been put out of mind, it has been put straight into the reactive engram bank, and in it there it can absorb life units. Yeah, that's probably true. Like I said, he's taken some things that do make sense in therapy every once in a while. This loopy computation that forgetting things makes them bearable is incredible in view of the fact that the hypnotist, for instance, gets results with a positive suggestion when he puts one of these deniers on the end of it. That has been known now for a great many eons. It was one of the first things the author was taught when he studied Asiatic practices. Is he talking about himself? Is he writing this? That's weird. Okay. Oh, hi, Queen. Good to see you. Okay, so the author was taught when he studied Asiatic practices. From India, it long ago filtered to Greece and Rome, and it has come to us via Anton Mesmer. It is a fundamental principle in several mystic arts. Its mechanics were known even to the Sioux medicine man, yet people at large, hitherto unguided about it, and perhaps because they lacked any real remedy, believed that the thing to do with sorrow was to forget it. Even Hippocrates, if I pronounced that right, Hippocrates remarks that the whole of an operation is not finished until the patient has recounted the incident to all of his friends in turn. And while this is inadequate therapy, it has been, like the confessional, a part of popular knowledge for lo these many ages, yet people persist in suppressing sorrow. I can get that. Okay, good. Thanks. The auditor will many times in his activity be begged by a patient not to talk to me about so and so's death. If he is foolish enough to heed this tearful plea when the patient is in reverie, then the auditor is actively blocking a release. That is the first incident he should get. Perhaps it would be bad without Dianetic technique to approach such things, but with our art, it is easy not only to enter the actual moment of the incident, but to then recount it until the tears and wailings are but echoes in the casebook. Treating that loss like an engram, recounting it until it is no longer painful emotion, ally, is to give back to the patient vitality he has not had since the incident took place. And if the incident does not ease on a dozen recountings, slide back down its sorrow track, just as you would with any other engram, and find earlier and earlier moments. A patient starting to discharge sorrow at the age of 50 may find himself 2 hours later down in the basic area recounting the primary moment of sorrow at the moment when the lost ally first became an ally. If the auditor can get the whole chain on any one ally, exhausting sorrow from it from later to earlier, taking all the sorrow he can get from every incident, and stripping the entire series of engrams of their charge, he may, in a few hours' work, rid the case of enough emotional charge to then begin an orderly erasure. Please observe this difference. The Achilles heel at the Allied computation can be considered late on the chain of incidents which concern that ally, which is to say that we have a funeral here, upright in time, which can be entered late and followed early. The Achilles heel of the contra survival engram chain is in the earliest incidents exactly the reverse of the emotionally painful engrams. To regain out of the engram bank life units so that enough free emotion is available to release or clear a case, start with late ally or pseudo ally losses and work back earlier. To release the physical pain of the individual from the engram bank, start early, as close to conception as you can get, and work through to late. Physical pain in the contra-survival chain can suppress painful emotion in the pro-survival chain. Painful emotion in the pro-survival chain can suppress physical pain in the contra-survival engrams. If you were to draw a picture of the prenatal area of the reactive engram bank, it would appear somewhat as follows. A long line drawn horizontally representing time would have dark blots on it representing engrams. One end of the line would represent conception, the other end birth. So the whole line is while you're in the womb. There we go again. Studio. Adam. Okay. So if you didn't get that, so there's a line from conception to birth, and then you have these dark blots that are engrams. I'm like, so just not one or two. He's saying that all these painful emotions and engrams or traumas were while you were in the womb again. He's just, like I said before, I get that, if you're in a very stressful environment, the baby will know. But I just don't think it would be quite that you would vividly remember it, is all I'm saying. Maybe some do. I mean, I'm sure it's possible. I just don't. He makes it seem like it. I don't want to say it's not possible, because I'm sure it is. But he thinks that every person can remember those things, and I don't think that's the case. I once saw someone before and after a Dianetic session after dealing with a loss. They looked so much more alive. It was like night and day. Yeah, I can see that, because it's the exact same way in regular therapy. If you deal with the loss and you, like he said, discharge the sorrow, talk about it, I can see this helping people. I really can, because he is taking therapy and using parts of that. So I can see where, people are able to get some benefit from that. Where were we? Picture. Above this line would lie a dark area, like a heavy mist, extending from one end of the line to the other and dropping down almost to it. Above this dark mist would lie another horizontal line, the apparent time track along which the patient returns. The first long line is the actual time track. The mist is painful emotion. The uppermost dark line is what the patient mistakes and uses for his time track. So, like, you have that one line with your engrams, the mist, and then a line of what you think your memories are. I guess that's what I'm getting from that. The painful emotion is, of course, occasionally tapped in the prenatal area itself, and the opportunity of dispersing it by so discovering prenatal emotional charges should never be overlooked by the auditor. Indeed, once much of the later life painful emotion is discharged, a great deal of painful emotion can be found amongst the early engrams, the better part of this mist and the first part the auditor often contracts is in late life. Although it originates as charge in late life, it can be said to lie on this prenatal area. Moments of loss, the loss by death or departure of any of the patient's allies, and the loss of an ally because he turns against the patient, trap these emotional charges and intervene them between the patient and actuality. Although the moment of loss was post-birth, in infanthood, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, it was retroactive in suppressing early engrams. Okay. Oh, hang on, I gotta stretch out, y'all. Hold on. This book is falling apart. I usually don't. Okay. I've got to get my craft room straightened out so I can start going in there to film. I can sit in my office chair. All right. Okay. This aspect of painful emotion is a key-in of the early incidents by the moment of loss. In other words, a moment of great loss suppresses the individual on the tone scale to a point where he approximates the level of early engrams, and these keyed in hold the units of charge thereafter. Life units so seized are held and are the life of engrams. As in electricity, a positive charge glances away from a positive charge. Like charges repel each other, the analyzer operating, it can be said for analogy, on the same kind of charge as that contained in the engram, glances away from the engram, which remains thereby unknown and intact. Hold on. As the individual returns into the area of the early engrams, which are held keyed in by virtue of the seized charges from late incidents, he can quite comfortably pass by enormous quantities of aberrative material without even suspecting it is present. However, when the late moments of painful emotion are released, the auditor can go immediately into the early area and find engrams of physical pain which he had not hitherto been able to uncover. Actually, the late moments and the early moments are both engrams. The news or observation of loss shuts down the analyzer, which is the brain, I think, if I remember right. Shuts down the analyzer, and everything which then enters it is engrammic and is filed in the reactive mind. Because of sight and a memory of activity which is connected to the present, all of which serves to keep an individual oriented, a person can often recall the moment of loss, whereas he cannot recall prenatal material, for he lacked in that area any connection with orienting factors which would impinge themselves on the analyzer. That was a hard paragraph. That was all commas. That whole paragraph, there's no punctuation except commas. All right. Impinge themselves on the analyzer. While the prenatal infant definitely, especially in the late stages, has an analyzer, experience and memory are not coordinated, and the existence of engrams is not then suspected by the analytical mind. This is not true of the later periods of life, particularly those after speech has been learned and is being used. The fact of the matter is that this later life ability to recall surrounding circumstances without feeling any extremity of pain also serves to hide here the existence of an actual engram. A person feels that he knows all about such a moment of loss analytically. Actually, he has no contact with the engram itself, which contains a moment of unconsciousness of a lesser depth than that for instance, of the anesthetic variety. Childhood losses of allies, however, can be so entirely occluded that the allies themselves are not remembered. This part of the chapter is kind of interesting. It's getting into the deep traumas, and it, like I said, it does kind of make some sense. Like what AA said, there are people that are going to go in there and get rid of and talk about some major sorrow or loss or trauma in their lives and get free of it. And I can see how that would work. Just don't tell LRH I said that. All right. How many more pages do we have? Oh, we're getting there. All right. The auditor will find very late engrams easy to contact. And he will also discover something else. You know, because I'm thinking about my own self. And that's true of me too. So before 7th grade, before my mom's divorce, when I was in just after 6th grade, I don't remember anything of that with her in it. I remember going to my friend's house. I remember going to my grandmother's house. But I cannot mentally picture any interactions with my mom. But I can remember everything after we moved in 7th grade because I was older, hitting adolescence. I remember all of that. So what he just said, you know, makes sense. You're going to have more memories of things that have happened later in your life, I think. And also, because I always thought, even the stuff I do remember, you know, I don't remember things vividly, you know, or, you know, it's a little foggy after, say, memories when I was 5. I'm 55 now. So 50 years later, things get foggy. I really need, I'm way down here. Okay, so we just said the auditor will find very late engrams easy to contact. That makes sense. And he will also discover something else. The patient may not be, as he is returning to such a moment of loss, occupying his own body. This phenomenon has been known for several thousand years, and even the latest mention of it merely said that it was interesting, without making any further effort to find out why a person returning to an area in hypnotic regression sometimes could be found within himself, which is to say, seeing things as though he were himself, and sometimes saw things there and himself included as part of the scenery, as though he had a detached view. Because we have discovered that a natural function of the mind is to return in an awake state to the past incidents, does not alter the fact that we encounter aspects hitherto known as mysterious phenomena of drug dreams and hypnotism. We are not by any means practicing hypnotism. He totally is. So this means that hypnotism and Dianetics use similar abilities of the mind. It does not mean that such abilities belong in the field of hypnotism. And one of the various aspects of the return is that it occasionally, or in some patients continually, encounters areas where the patient is outside his body. I believe that's been called an out-of-body experience. These exteriorized views of self have two explanations. One of them is valence. Remember, valence means personality. So one of them is personality, whereby the patient has taken unto himself the identity of another person and sees the scene through that other person's eyes. I get the out-of-body experience, but I don't get that part. I think that might be one of the things. I haven't heard that in regular like therapy or out-of-body experiences before. So that might just be something he put in there. Of course, I don't know everything, so. These exteriorized views of self, oh, I read that. Seeing the scenes through that other person's eyes. The other is exteriorization, in which painful emotion is present in such quantity that the patient cannot occupy himself. That painful emotion may stem from past or future incidents to the moment when the patient is witnessing a scene to which he has been dianetically returned. On several recountings of the scene, the patient will come nearer and nearer to an occupation of his body until at last he sees the scene from within his body. At times, no emotional discharge, tears, etc., takes place until the patient has gone over the incident several times and until he is within his own body. It is as though, returned, he had to scout the ground to find out if it was safe to occupy himself. If after a few recountings no discharge, such as tears, take place, then the emotion is suspended elsewhere, earlier or later, but usually much later. Exteriorization because of emotion is the same as exteriorization because of physical pain to all intents and purposes of the auditor. When he encounters a case which, all the way up and down the track, is continually exterior, he should address his skill to the release of moments of painful emotion. All patients seem to have the idea that time heals and that some incident of 10 or 20 years ago, these pages are starting to stick, 10 or 20 years ago, no longer has any effect upon them. Time is a great charlatan, not a great healer, as has been remarked. Time, by the processes of growth and decay, alters an environment, introduces new faces and activities, and thus alters the restimulators. A moment of painful emotion in the past has, like any other engram, its own restimulators, and is, in addition, holding keyed in all the early engrams which relate to it so that their restimulators also work. Every restimulator has a set of restimulators which are associated to it by the analytical mind, which cannot see the real restimulator. All this makes a complex pattern. The complex in therapy only if one does not know the source of aberration. If the auditor returns the patient to any moment of painful emotion in the past and runs it as an engram, he will discover that all its original charge is present and will discharge. He will usually find the patient shying away from any thought of going into the actual engram. I can see that. If it's traumatic, you don't really want to go there. The pre-clear may attempt to detail all manner of bric-a-brac, his own thoughts, the reasons why it no longer is painful to him, and so forth. These thoughts and data, before the fact or after it, are about as much use in running an engram as a dissertation about childhood illusions was to the problem of removing aberrations from the human mind. The auditor who will listen to these reasons and I remembers in lieu of running the engram itself will not get his patient well and will waste valuable hours of therapy. An auditor who will do this belongs to the hand patting school of thought, which believes sympathy has value. He does not belong in an auditor's chair. It is wasted time, wasted valuable time, to listen to anything the patient thought or said or did or believed when the patient should be going into the engram and running it as an engram. Certainly, there is a necessity to find out from the patient's talk where that engram is, but once it is located, all else is dross. Dross, inferior, trivial, or worthless. I've never heard that word. Make sure I'm all the way down. Okay. Take a moment when a child is notified of his parents' deaths. The auditor learns that the parents died when the child was 2 years of age. He can then deduce, without further trouble or questions, that somebody must have told his patient about the death of the parents, that there was a precise moment when the patient, then an infant, learned about that death. Recounting the matter in present time without being returned, the patient is using all the intervening years as buffers against the painful emotion. The auditor returns the patient without further preamble than the usual routine of putting the patient into reverie to the moment when the patient learned of the death of parents. Now, this sounds exactly like hypnotic regression, and that is used and has been done. The patient may do a little fumbling to orient himself in the past, but shortly he will have a contact with the instant somebody informed him. Be assured, if that child loved his parents at all, that an engram exists here. The engram starts at the first moment the child is informed, when the analyzer can be expected to have shut down. The end of the engram is a moment, an hour, a day, or even a week later when the analyzer again turned on. Between the first moment of analytical attenuation and a regain of analytical power is the engram. The first minutes of it are the most severe. Running an hour of it, an hour of incident, not of therapy, should be more than ample. Most auditors run only the first few minutes several times to get a test of whether or not there is going to be any emotional discharge. Run such a period of loss, which must contain painful emotion, exactly as you would run a period of physical pain and unconsciousness with another source. For the period of painful emotion is an unconscious period just as certainly as if the patient has been struck with a club. If the emotion in this period can be contacted with 4 or 5 recountings, each time starting at the beginning, making sure the patient is returned and in contact with all perceptics of the incident, and running it for what it is, an engram. Then the engram should be recounted until the emotion in it is gone, until the patient is bored with it or even cheerful about it. If after 4 or 5 recountings the patient is still well exteriorized, still has not contacted any emotion, then the charge is suspended elsewhere, either earlier or later, and tries should be made in terms of other losses, no matter how many years from the unyielding incident, to get a discharge. After a discharge is blown off elsewhere, the incident first addressed, as in the case of the 2-year-old who lost his parents, may discharge. It is certain that sooner or later such an incident will discharge, and it is also certain that the case will not make much progress in getting any bulk of physically painful engrams until such a severe incident is well discharged. Discharges are contacted, often in very unlikely places. Somewhere they contact the surface enough so that a touch by the returned patient will permit the units to free, permit engrams to key out, and come into view on the time track in their proper places. The engram bank becomes severely distorted by painful emotion, and the areas of painful emotion become severely distorted by physical pain elsewhere. The filing system of the reactive mind is bad. The file clerk is able to recover and deliver to the auditor only so many painful emotion engrams or physical pain engrams at a time. They may be disordered in their positions on the track, which is to say, the auditor may contact an early physically painful engram, always his most important job, then contact one in mid-prenatal, then one post-birth, and thereafter no other engrams of the physical pain variety seem to be present. Engrams of the physical variety, which contain knockouts by accidents, illness, surgery, or injury. This does not mean that the case is stalemated or that the patient is cleared. It more likely means that there are incidents of the other engram variety, painful emotion stemming from loss by death, departure, or reversal of allies, which can now be contacted. The auditor then looks for and exhausts the emotional discharge from the loss engrams, usually later in life. These, with the units freed back in circulation, allow earlier physical pain engrams to appear, and the auditor reduces each one of these he can contact. As soon as he can no longer find physically painful engrams, he goes back to a search for painful emotion engrams, and so forth, alternatively as necessary. The mind, being a self-protecting mechanism, will sooner or later block the patient from physical pain engrams if painful emotion engrams are ready, and it will block him from painful emotion engrams as soon as physical pain engrams are ready. A lot of reading today. All right. All right. Start late to get painful emotion and work back early. Start early to get physical pain engrams and work toward late. Okay. So painful emotion, you work backwards. Physical pain, you work forward. Okay. And whenever any engram is contacted, run it until it is no longer troublesome in any way to the patient or is entirely gone, refiled, but gone for all the auditor and patient will be able to tell at the moment. If an incident, after many recountings, shows no sign of lightening, somatic decreasing, or emotion either not expressed or not decreasing, only then should the auditor seek another incident. In a painful emotion engram, the charge is often later. In a physical pain engram, the suspension is invariably caused by the existence of the same phrase in an earlier physical pain engram, which can be contacted. And in such case, the auditor should go back over the phrases which brought him to the somatic until he finds a contact and a lift of the engram. Oh, we're almost done. It should be extremely clear by this time that rationalization about action or conduct or conditions does not advance therapy and is of no use beyond occasional aid in locating engrams. It should be equally clear that no amount of explanation or hand patting or evaluation by the auditor is going to advance the erasure of the engrams themselves. It should be plain that what a person thought at the time of the incident was not aberrative. It should be clear that painful emotion puts the compartments and demon circuits into the mind, and that the physical engrams hold the aberration and physical pain in the body. This entire operation is mechanical. It has nothing to do with justified thought or shame or reasons. It has only to do with exhausting the engram bank. When the bulk of painful emotion is gone, the person is released. When the engram bank is exhausted of content, the person is cleared. That's well said. Mark that. All right. The mind is like a fine piece of equipment. As itself and as a mechanism, it is almost impossible to destroy except by removing some of its parts. Engrams do not remove parts of the mind, they add unnecessary things to it. Envision a beautiful, streamlined machine operating perfectly. That would be the mind without the additions of pain and painful emotion. Now envision this beautiful machine in the hands of a crew of moronic mechanics. They start to work around it and do not know that what they do affects the machine at all. Now they see that something is wrong with the machine and are all unwitting that they have placed various assorted monkey wrenches, hat pins, old cigar butts, and yesterday's garbage into it and around it. Their first thought is to put something new on or in the machine to correct the operation, and they add arbitrary gadgets to it in order to patch up the machine's operation. Some of these gadgets appear to help the machine, sympathy engrams, and can be used in the presence of the remaining bric-a-brac by the machine itself to help its stability. The morons interrupt the fuel supply, painful emotion engrams. Or, like the Japanese captain who beat the car with a switch when it would not go, try to goad the machine punishment drive, and so add more trouble. At last, this machine appears to be a hopeless wreck, being almost hidden beneath everything added to it and thrust into it, and the moron mechanics shake their heads and say, "Let's put something else on it or it will stop." They do, and they do, and the machine appears to stop, goes insane. In Dianetics, a workmanlike job of clearing away the debris in and around the machine is performed. It is not done by adding any more debris. The moron mechanics, the content of the reactive mind, seem dismayed at this action, but the machine itself, suddenly aware that something is being done for it, which will actually bring it into good running operation again, begins to help. The more debris which is cleared, the better it runs, and the less force the moron mechanics have. The course of improvement should be and is rapid. We can stop when the machine is running at least as well as the normal machine, a release, or we can stop when we have all the debris out of the machine, a clear. When we have effected a clear, we behold something which has never been beheld before because it never before existed in a debris-free state. A perfect machine, streamlined, powerful, shining, able to adjust and care for all its own operations without further therapeutic assistance of any kind. Okay, bye, Scooter Mom. So, this part of the chapter, because the first two parts, he was going into areas of absurdity with the prenatal stuff. We were mainly shocked about some of the stuff that he used in actual engrams, this part of the chapter kind of makes some sense. I know, like I said, don't tell LRH I said that. Because in therapy, hypnotic regression, trauma, I mean, all of that makes sense. He's following right along with normal therapeutic like mechanisms. You know, and when you get down to the basic part of your trauma and you can deal with it and you can release it, you're going to feel better. So that part does make sense. And what you said, AA, you saw somebody come out of auditing and let me put that comment back up. I can see how that, I mean, he is following, he obviously either has been in therapy or studied some therapy to get to at least make Dianetics workable, sound workable, be workable, whichever he wanted. He just, you know, conflated so much. He added so much to it. The basics are there. I guess what, you know, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a psychologist, so I'm trying to explain this as best I can for what I'm thinking. So, like I said, that part, so we didn't stop as much because he studied some Freud. Yeah, I know. I could see a lot of the Freud in there in the first. I don't know if you could hear them. They were playing too hard. It's the one you're hearing is the little one. She's attacking the big one. She gets rough sometimes. I have to calm her down. So, like I said, I'm glad you were here for this today, AA, and you said that because I was kind of thinking the same thing, that there are benefits in there. You know, I've had people ask me what's the benefits to Scientology. I'm like, other survivors have said really none. There is a little bit I can see in this. And if like I said, if he would have stuck to just this and was really trying to help people, it might have been something completely different. He just had to go beyond that. It's like he couldn't stop himself. He had to keep adding and adding and adding and just made it this whole other thing in the OT levels and all of that. If he would have just, and I get why he had to change it, because Dianetics went bankrupt. The Dianetics centers went bankrupt. 3 months after this was released, it failed miserably. If that had not occurred and he would have just stuck with this, I think, you know, things would have been different. The Dianetics centers, courses, I think it might have actually helped people, and it would have been less of a cult. I guess what I'm trying, less of a religion or a cult or church, and more of an alternative therapy, which is what he calls it. Okay. So the back says, can you clear your mind of negative feelings? How can you increase confidence in yourself? How does your mind influence your body? Why do people lose their self-respect? How can you be yourself and gain control of your life? Other than the prenatal stuff and the constant what clouds it all up is this stuff about so many pregnant women trying to unalive and it not working, and that causing you a whole life of pain. Or they're having an affair and the baby hears what's going on. If he had reined that in a little bit more, it could have just been different, is what I'm seeing so far. So, like I said before, I can see now how people would. I've read several parts of this book that I would have been like, if I knew nothing about Scientology, Nothing about L. Ron Hubbard. And I was reading this book, and there was Dianetic centers with courses. I could easily go there and study. And if it hadn't gone so far, I don't even know how to put it. Yeah, he should have run it like a normal business or a normal self-help alternative to psychology. At the time, I could see where that also would, because we've talked about what psychology was like in the 50s when he released this book. So there was a very large need for something other than, well, we're just going to put you in an asylum, do electric shock, do lobotomies. And I'm sure there were good doctors back then that did normal therapy, and you sat and you talked to them. I know that was available, just not like it is today. So yeah, if he would have run this and left it Dianetics, done the Dianetic centers, and hadn't tried to make it that you could cure arthritis and tuberculosis by going clear. If he hadn't gone that far with it, if he'd have stayed here, I think it would have succeeded and been a very different animal. That's just my final thoughts on this chapter. So next week, we're going into some types of engrams. So we're just going to get into types of engrams, so we read how to release the engrams. Now we're going to talk about types. Let's see how long this chapter is. Well, don't be another long one, dude. So I can tell you some of the contra survival engram, because we've heard him talk about these already. Pro survival engram. Let's see. Sympathy engram. Painful emotion engram. All right, it's not so long. 348 to 366. So I think we can do that in one go. So the heading says some types of engrams. 2 examples of each kind of engram are given so that the auditor can clearly understand their differences. So that actually might be a little bit interesting. So I will see you guys out on the street this week. And if not, yeah, I can see that. And see, that's where I get that he wants to be rigid and stick to the formula. But the fact that they don't allow sympathy or kindness is really what kind of ruins it. Because I think a therapist should be sympathetic, but not. I get what he's trying to get at, that you don't want to be so sympathetic that you don't stay on track to take care of the trauma. But I mean, people need that. Humans need sympathy and need, a caring person. And when I found out that there was, and I can never remember the term, but there was a derogatory term in Scientology that if you're kind, you get called that. I'll find out what it is. But just to know that if you show kindness in Scientology, that you're looked down on, that's where he ruins it. That's where the abuse comes in. That allows abuse. So instead of just not showing sympathy, they go, or kindness. So what's left? Abuse and unkindness. Yep, I agree. I needed sympathy when I was ill. Yeah. And like they talked about this girl, I remember, who was sick for 4 months. And all they did was isolate her in a room by herself until finally it got so bad they had to take her to the doctor. Oh, no, that's even worse. They see kindness as covert hostility. Dang. That's even worse. Wow. And see, that's where it goes in the toilet. You have all these things that could have been beneficial, but he was too much of a sadist, a malignant narcissist, whatever was wrong with his brain. He took it way too far. Madness. We all need kindness in our lives. Yes. And I think that's why we're all in this now. Is hi Cher. Is we were just saying, if you just got here, what we just read actually made some sense about releasing trauma and you feel better. That's pretty much what it was about. And if he would have just stuck with that, with Dianetics and the good parts, this could have been a whole new animal. But instead, he took away, you couldn't be sympathetic. You couldn't be kind. So the only thing left, that creates a vacuum. Okay, so then what's left is hostility and abuse. And that's why people are leaving and escaping, and why there are books and TV shows and documentaries and protesters and YouTube, because of that. So I'm going to end there and go deal with these dogs that are losing their mind. So like I said, I'll see y'all next week, or I might see you while I'm out this week. So y'all have a good week, and we'll see you next time.